College football has changed and the sport has never been as exciting as it is now. By November, typically in a normal college football season, there's only about 5 or 6 teams that you really give a chance to win the college football playoff or the national title game before the CFP era. Now, legitimately, there are 20, maybe even more than that, teams that could qualify for the 12-team playoff field. And going into next year, there's 10 or 11 teams that, without a doubt in my mind, could see themselves playing in that national title game and hoisting the college football playoff national title trophy. So this is a way too early prediction which 12 teams are going to qualify for the CFP next year. If you're new here to Blitz with Blender, welcome. Hit that subscribe button and enjoy. And we're going to get started into it. Typically, you go from the lowest ranking up to the first, but we're actually going to start with number 1 and work our way down the same way that the committee does it when they release their rankings. That they typically come out with the teams that are at the highest: Indiana, Ohio State, Georgia, Texas Tech this past year. So we're going to come out with that first and then go make our way down. At number 1, I really think that the Oregon Ducks are going to be an excellent team next year. Dan Lanning has gotten closer just about every year. From the Pac-12 title loss to Washington and the quarterfinal loss to the Buckeyes to the semifinal loss to Indiana, there are a lot of indicators that next year this is a team that gets to the national title game. Why? They retained their entire defensive line. I see this being the best defensive line in college football. Why? Bear Alexander, Mateo Uyunglele, Amari Washington. 3 of those guys could be first-round picks, and then you also add to them Tatum Tuioti. Dante Moore returns. He may be the first player taken in the 2027 NFL Draft. You're looking at potentially 4 or 5 first-round picks on that Oregon team, and them having a really good receiving core. DeCorian Moore, he's a second-year true sophomore, and Evan Stewart, who didn't play a snap last season, he will be back for his senior season with the Oregon Ducks. They are a really talented unit defensively. They're a veteran. You look at the veteran Michigan team, Ohio State, all of those guys that were returning, and then Indiana this past season and how veteran that they were. And the schedule for Oregon, it stacks up to really be manageable for them. Their toughest games are at USC. I'll likely be at that one here in Los Angeles, at Ohio State, as well as they play Michigan, and then the rivalry game every season they've got the Washington Huskies. I think that the bottom absolute sort of floor for them is 10-2. And very likely you're looking at an 11-1 season there for the Oregon Ducks, where they're essentially playing for the right to play in the Rose Bowl game and a first-round bye in the college football playoff. We're going to move it on to number 2, a representative that I think they likely play in that Big Ten title game, the Ohio State Buckeyes. Look, Jeremiah Smith and Julian Sayin, at this point right now, it's a coin flip of whether both of those guys are Heisman finalists next season, the same way that C.J. Stroud and Marvin Harrison Jr. were back a couple of seasons ago. Reasonably, I see it 1,500 yards and 15 touchdowns next year, just because there's been that number 2. You'd always had Smith and Jigba. There'd been Chris Olave or Garrett Wilson, Carnell Tate, Emeka Buka. There's always been that number 2. Who's the number 2 for Ohio State's offense next year? A lot of indicators look like it's either Brandon Inniss or the true freshman coming in, Chris Henry Jr. out of Mater Dei, but another young player. You can't really expect the guy to be as good as Smith was as a freshman. It's very tough to do what he did. This could be the best receiver of them all in the history of the sport. So Chris Henry Jr. very likely is maybe a 500-yard, 7 touchdown kind of production guy, and it's not until his sophomore year he explodes on the scene. They lost Mylan Graham, Bryson Rodgers, Quincy Porter, and with all that production, you're going to see it go towards their wide receiver, the best player in college football. And defensively, they brought in some veterans: Earl Little Jr., Terry Moore. They brought him in from Duke, Russaw and James Smith from Alabama. They went to guys that are veteran. It's been the same sort of mold. They lost what will wind up being 4 or 5 first-round picks once the draft winds up happening. But that schedule looks to be a little bit tricky. I see Ohio State as a 10-2 or 11-1 team. This looks like an SEC schedule. First of all, they play at Texas. That's going to be a night game. They play at Iowa. That is a very difficult place to play. At Indiana, at USC. You've got Oregon there at the Shoe. The last time you played Oregon at home was a loss to those Ducks. And then Michigan. So half of your games, those are circle with a red marker kind of games where there's danger on the schedule. You could very likely see a 2-loss Ohio State regular season team the same as 2024, or do you wind up seeing a 9-3 Buckeye team potentially? I believe that this team can be 10-2 just because Julian Sayin coming back with that entire offensive line continuity. It looks like the Buckeyes can have something working special there. They brought in Arthur Smith, so expect a run game with Bo Jackson to be high-powered, establishing that run, and then getting the football on the perimeter to number 4. A very dangerous team year in, year out. This is sort of the gold standard of the sport now, replacing the Alabama Crimson Tide. At number 3, we're going to go with the Texas Longhorns. Bringing in Cam Coleman might have been my favorite transfer portal move this past offseason. Rasheem Biles from Pitt, 17 tackles for loss, 100 total tackles, 4.5 sacks. Now, I don't believe Texas will be as good in 2026 as the expectation was what they would be in 2025, but that still doesn't mean that they can't be a national title contender or a team that takes the trophy home. Arch Manning, essentially now, with the information we have available to us, the expectations for him, they've dropped somewhat. He's not this generational talent. He's a guy that's human, that struggles. And now where he's got this sort of weight lifted off his back, and he knows that essentially what he's got to do is play within himself, not be a hero. And the Texas offensive line wasn't very good last year. Their offense was horrible. They couldn't protect much, and defensively, they were ranked in the 20s. They weren't the top 5 defense that we expected with all of those guys like Colin Simmons, who enters a junior season. And Colin Simmons is a guy that will be in conversations to be the first overall pick in this 2026 draft with potentially Arch Manning, with guys like Dante Moore, with Jeremiah Smith, a lot of those players, some of the best in the sport. And that's why I've got them loaded up so highly. And I think that the best 5 players in the country very likely could be Arch. It could be Colin Simmons, Smith, Sayin, Moore. There's a heck of a lot of talent in that group, and that's sort of where the sport is led. Mendoza will be the first player taken in 2026 NFL draft. They won the national title and the Heisman Trophy. So Raleek Brown, they added as a running back to that core. He's got a ton of speed. Hollywood Smothers. This Texas team will be loaded. The path that they are going to face, so that Ohio State matchup in week 2, that's clearly going to be one that's circled. You've got at Tennessee, it's going to be Oklahoma in Red River, Florida, Ole Miss. But as SEC schedules go, this isn't much different from anybody else. After adding that 9th SEC game on there, they finished with games like at LSU at Tiger Stadium, at Texas A&M, but I'm serious when I say this. That schedule that they play is no different from something you'll see out of Alabama or what Georgia has. There's a lot more parity in the conference now, with not one team having a really tough schedule like Oklahoma and then somebody having something that they're playing that's a lot weaker. A lot of these schedules now are getting a lot more balanced. And so from that, I'm looking at Texas being a 9-3 or a 10-2 team. I see there being 1 or 2 9-3 teams. With the SEC schedules now and what happened last year and leaving out a couple of those schools, you really start to believe that there's going to be a separation between respect in the ACC and the Big 12 and then the SEC with these really tough schedules and the strength of schedule that they're going to be working with, that a 9-3 SEC is going to be beating out 10-2 ACCs and 10-2 Big 12. So almost just affords you a little bit of more of an incentive to play those tough games, because truly 9-3 teams are going to start making the playoff with the new element of the sport heading towards respecting those games. It's just a travesty what happened last year with a lot of really good teams that were left out, and why it looks like the sport's going to be expanded to more. The last team that I think gets a first round bye, the Texas Tech Red Raiders. They got one this past year, and you look throughout that conference and you see BYU is likely the biggest threat with Bear Bachmeier, but they bring in Brendan Sorsby. Bryce Pollock returns 48 tackles, 5 interceptions from a year ago. But truly, the biggest thing for Texas Tech maybe isn't even their own roster. It's who they play. They've got games that are tough, like at Baylor, at Cincinnati, but that is about it. They've got TCU at the end of the season. But I'll just tell you the schedule. Abilene Christian, at Oregon State, Houston, then Sam Houston, at Deion Sanders, Colorado, then Arizona State. They added Amarion Miller from Colorado, at Cincinnati, Arizona, West Virginia, at Oklahoma State, at Baylor, TCU. If Texas Tech doesn't go 11-1 next year, something will have gone horribly wrong for that team. This is a team that very likely should win that conference once again and get that first round bye. At number 5, expect the Indiana Hoosiers to be back. Josh Hoover, this kid is experienced. He's a pocket quarterback, and he's going to have weapons. They did lose Cooper. They lost Surratt. They lose Hemby. They lose Kalen Black. But what did they get in return? They get Nick Marsh. He is a very talented player, one of the best wide receivers from the transfer portal. Charlie Becker will step into a far larger role, 6'4", runs 23 miles an hour. This is going to be, I think, a top 10 wide receiver in this sport next year. Tyreek Tucker, Mario Landino, those guys return big pieces. You really see here the trajectory towards the sport has shifted. 3 straight national championships go to the Big Ten. There's a lot of evidence that starts to suggest here that you're going to have 3 of the best 5 teams in the country be teams coming from the Big Ten once again, just like this last year with the Buckeyes, Oregon, and Indiana. It's a lot of signs that are trending towards that being a lot of the same. Toby Osunsami. I'm very confident that 99% of you don't know that name. This was a really good player out of Kansas State before he had an injury earlier in the season. But that schedule for Indiana next year, it's looking very manageable. They play the Trojans at home, Ohio State at home, and at Michigan, throw in at Jed Fish and the Washington Huskies. Those are their 4 toughest games. Bare minimum floor. This will be a 10-win team. Very likely they're in that running to be an 11-1 team. And you've got in Ohio State playing Oregon, Ohio State playing Indiana, and you're looking to see somebody try and separate themselves from those 3, as the Buckeyes play both, but Oregon and Indiana, they don't play each other. At number 6, the Miami Hurricanes. They bring in Darian Mensah. They bring in Damon Wilson, the transfer from Missouri. I had him as the best transfer portal the edge defender in this. I know Princely Umamielen leaves to join the LSU Tigers from Ole Miss, but that schedule, you compare what Ohio State or what some of these SEC teams play. Listen to this for Miami, and you try and tell me a team that's got Malachi Toney and some of these guys in this conference trying to defend him, except for a matchup at Notre Dame, at Stanford, Florida A&M, at Wake Forest, Central Michigan, then at Clemson. Excited and already fired up for that game, October 3rd. Florida State, tough to know what they'll be. Pittsburgh, they were pretty good this past season. At North Carolina, then at Notre Dame, Duke, Virginia Tech, and Boston College. Floor for them is 9-3. There is without a doubt a path where they go 11-1, and after this past season, disparities in the conference, there's a couple of teams with schedules that are a bit more manageable. Miami, right there in the tiers of the middle of the pack for not being a incredibly easy ACC schedule. Definitely not one of the hardest, though, so they're in a very good spot. Especially got a lot of confidence in Mensa. He knows the conference well and playing with Duke, so you'd expect him to have some success with them next year. And Miami, if they are able to get the production at Damon Wilson, I'm projecting, then that's an explosive front. I had him projected as a top 45 pick in his previous draft. So he's coming back to look to be a top 10 selection. At number 7, there's the Georgia Bulldogs with Gunnar Stockton returning, as does Raylen Wilson and KJ Bolden with his 76 tackles, 2.5 tackles for a loss and 2 interceptions. Isaiah Canion transfers from Georgia Tech. He got tired of playing the Bulldogs the last couple of seasons with 2 close losses. Nate Frazier and Chauncey Bowens, those guys also return. Bobo, their center. As SEC schedules go, again, it's manageable. Tennessee State, Western Kentucky, and Arkansas. Then you see John Mateer and the Oklahoma Sooners, Vanderbilt, then at Alabama. After that point, though, there is a possibility, there is a world where Georgia has 2 losses at that part of the season, where Oklahoma, Vandy, Bama, they lose 2 games. You could see them, though, winning out the back half of the stretch in their last 6. Auburn, Florida, in the world's largest cocktail party. We still use that nickname. At Ole Miss, again, no Mom Yellen, and they do retain Chambliss and Lacey, which is big. Then Missouri, at South Carolina, dangerous with Cock-Vember for the Gamecocks, and then you're not divisional, but your matchup with Georgia Tech in the rivalry game. I see Georgia as a 9-3 or a 10-2 team, and with a lot of parity coming in the SEC continuing next season, a lot of 8-4s, a ton of 9-3s. It's going to be tough to sort of see those teams materialize as your 7-2 conference records. If you can go 8-1, you're looking at a national title favorite potentially, though. There's going to be a ton of teams at that 6-3 sort of 7-2 mark there in the conference. At number 8, the Penn State Nittany Lions. You're seeing here now how the impact of the Big Ten being top heavy, how they can beat up on the lower teams, and where in the SEC, you've got legitimately 12 real football teams. You've got 10 teams year in, year out that can be ranked in the top 25 and 12 in the top 35. Penn State, this schedule is one of the easiest in college football next year. You got the most experienced quarterback in Rocco Becht. Carson Hansen returns. He comes over from Iowa State, as does about the entire Iowa State team. James Peoples transfers in from Ohio State. Eskildson is coming over, as well as a bunch of those other Iowa State guys. We're not going to name everybody, but listen to the schedule for Penn State. Marshall, okay, at Temple, Buffalo, Wisconsin. So they'll be 4-0 heading into October. At Northwestern, they'll be 5-0 before they play USC at home and then at Michigan. So 5-0, they play USC and Michigan back-to-back weeks. Let's say they lose one of those games. They would be 6-1 before the final stretch. Purdue, worst team in the Big Ten. At the Washington Huskies, circle that one. Then Minnesota, Rutgers, and Maryland. If there isn't a schedule in the country that screams 10-2 to you, or possibly 11-1 for a team that may not have one of the best 10 rosters in the country, 10, 15 rosters in the country, it's tough for me to see Penn State not making the college football playoff, especially when 10-2 from the Big Ten gets you in, folks. You can't have a 10-2 Big Ten team get in over a 9-3 SEC team, especially not now when you've never had a 9-3 team. If you're comparing to the ACC or the Big 12, we talked about that earlier, it's possible, but not the Big Ten. There's too much respect. You're likely seeing 4 teams get into that college football playoff from the Big Ten, with Penn State being there with a chance to host a game in the first round. At number 9, let's go to the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Quincy Porter and Mylan Graham, they join Marcus Freeman, Their only losable games are Miami and at BYU. That's really it. With Christian Gray and Leonard Moore on the perimeter, that's the best cornerback duo in college football. Not a lot of teams are going to test them, especially not anybody except for the with BYU and the Cougars, or with Miami and Malachi Toney and that offense. So Enos Williams, the running back who had 5 touchdowns last year, even losing Price and Jeremiah Love, you're going to start to see Notre Dame shift from this heavy running team with Love to now a CJ Carr, second full year as a starter, airing the football out. He's a good candidate to be a guy that throws 30 touchdown passes. Next year, they add Gray, a defensive tackle, and this is a veteran football team, folks. Wisconsin, then Rice, Michigan State, Purdue. They will be 4-0 in September. Then at South Carolina, Stanford, they will be 6-0. There's no Texas A&M early in the season. Once again, like it's been the last 2 years. There's no Miami. This will be a 6-0 team before they go play BYU on the road. Then there's Navy, and then it's Miami before they finish with Boston College, SMU, and at Syracuse. If Notre Dame is 10-2, like they were a year ago, they will be ranked in the top 12. And if Notre Dame is ranked in the top 12, Notre Dame gets a spot in the playoff automatically. I disagree with that. There's a very real situation where Notre Dame, being ranked, call it 11th or 12th in the country, is not as good at 10-2 as a number 15 or 16 ranked SEC team, simply because they have 3 losses on their schedule, having to play LSU on the road and at Bama on the road, and then Georgia at home and having to play Tennessee and A&M. Like, that's a schedule that's regular in the Southeast Conference and what you see there. So this is a very interesting team in Notre Dame. Got to certainly keep an eye on that, but I do think they've got a very good roster heading into, and one of the best coaches in the sport. At number 10, there's the LSU Tigers with Lane Kiffin. First year with them, first year in the playoff. Again, the favoring of sort of this committee that does, it feels like they listen to Twitter. It feels like they watch First Take and Get Up, and they listen to Colin Cowherd or Joel Klatt and Josh Pay. It feels like they're a unit that listens to all the noise, and some of those decisions wind up impacting them, and you're going to see it. A 9-3 SEC team get in. There's just too many tough schedules, and so they've got Alabama, Texas, Tennessee back-to-back in November. If they go 2-1 in that stretch, they will be a playoff team. They've got Weeks back, Dominic McKinley back, Trey'Dez Green, he returns, and then the best transfer portal class in the sport, Sam Levitt, and then TJ Daugherty and Princewell Uman Mielen, both top 10 defensive line players, and then the number 1 offensive line in the country going into next year, Jordan Seaton to protect Sam Levitt, who's mobile, he can get outside the pocket. This is a dangerous team. They start the year with Clemson. They've got Louisiana Tech. So do we find something out about Clemson next year? People are going to be hyping them up just like they were when they beat Clemson, who wound up to be a pretty bad team this past season. But at Ole Miss week 3, Kiffin returns to Oxford. Get ready for that. The pitchforks will be out. Then A&M and Marcel Reed. McNeese, Kentucky. So when you look at that first 6 games, add Mississippi State to that 7, add Auburn to that 8, I've got 7-1 marked in for the LSU Tigers heading into November. And like I said, if they go 2-1 in that stretch of Alabama home, Texas home, at Tennessee on the road, they go 2-1 in that stretch, they would have a 9-2 record before they play at Arkansas and finish the season 10-2. Again, you don't want to put any of your fate in the hands of the committee. If you are a 9-3 team, it's something you just don't want to be doing, and this is the way it likely shakes out. They could lose to at Ole Miss, A&M, or Clemson. Very likely they go 2-1 in that stretch. They beat everybody else. At Auburn, I see them being just out-rostering them simply going into next year, especially Cam Coleman leaving, Keldrick Falk, he leaves. Atkins does return for the Tigers, but Bama, Texas, and Tennessee, that will decide their season for LSU. At number 11, Texas A&M, the Aggies. So this would be 4 SEC teams, 4 Big Ten teams. Notre Dame, if you're keeping math, that's 9. A Big 12 team in Texas Tech, 10. And Miami, that's 11. So we would also have the group of 6 team that would be coming in at number 12. And so very heavily dominated by the upper levels of the sports. Texas A&M, why do I think they can make the playoff again? It's their quarterback in Reed. He'll be a Heisman candidate. The turnovers came up at a really bad time. In the game against Miami, they could not block Bain and Mesidor. And with Craver and Concepcion, it was just shocking to see how a lack of a run game, and they didn't have separation downfield. They do have Isaiah Horton added to replace Concepcion. Not as fast of a guy, but he does add size, and he's a good red zone target. Dalton Brooks, Ratcliffe, Damian Sanford, they all return for the Aggies. That's really big for their defense. So let's go through this schedule. Missouri State, Arizona State, Kentucky, all 3 at home. Those are 3 wins off the bat, just from playing at home. Then they play the Tigers on the road week 4, as we just talked about. Then Arkansas, Missouri, and the Citadel. So, very likely, this is a 6-1, maybe even 7-0 team if they could take care of business and win on the road against LSU like they did this past season. It's kind of interesting that they get that game on the road back-to-back years, right? But then it's at Bama, at South Carolina, Tennessee, Oklahoma, and Texas. If they aren't 6-1, there's major trouble. A 5-2 A&M team that very likely has 2 losses down the stretch. This is where we're in that conversation where I'm predicting the A&M team to go 9-3 next season. At South Carolina and Sellers and Bama, at Oklahoma, and then you throw in Tennessee and then Texas at the end of the season in a rivalry game. That stretch, going 3-2 would be great, and that's where if you could just handle business the first part of that schedule, you'd be putting yourself in great shape. But I feel really good about Elko's Aggies next season. At number 12, Brian Hartline's USF. South Florida, the Bulls. Michael Van Buren transfers in. They finished 5th in the American last year, 6-0 at home with good home field advantage. Remember, they went 2-1 to start the year against ranked teams. It was very impressive. They were ranked in the top 25. They have a schedule that is as manageable as anything I've talked about. Bryson Rodgers, they bring in. He was a 4-star with the Buckeyes. He's 6'2", 200 pounds. He's talented. CJ Hicks. Now, this is an interesting player because Hicks is a guy you may have never heard of. He was a former 5-star, top 10 recruit in the country back in 2022. He was recruited only behind Harold Perkins in that class. That was the same class as Abdul Carter, who I think was like the 32nd linebacker prospect. And then Jalen Walker was also in that class. But listen to this schedule and tell me that South Florida doesn't have a path to be going 11-1. FIU, Delaware State, Bowling Green on the road, Kent State at Army. That would be their toughest game of the first part of the year. At East Carolina, at Florida Atlantic, UAB, Memphis, second toughest game of the year. Temple, Tulane, that will be very likely their toughest game. And then UTSA, this has 11-1 written all over it. They're going to be a better roster than they were this past season. The question is, can they simply just execute and Brian Hartline's culture be brought in from the get-go? One of the best position coaches in this millennium. I've got a lot of faith that USF can have a legitimate season, and they potentially could be a dangerous team to play in that first round of the CFP. So that is my 12-team college football playoff prediction for who gets in. Going to be a ton of college football content coming out, all the NFL draft stuff that we have here, and then another prediction for how the playoff will play out there that we'll do in this summer. But I appreciate you so much for watching. Let me know here what you would change, how you would switch things up, what teams that you really like next year. Give me your national title favorite? Who you think's going to win it? Give it your top 3 out of the G6. Who do you think's going to be the representative from there? And if you agree, are we going to see a 9-3 team, maybe even 2, make the playoff next season? I appreciate you guys so much. Make sure to hit that subscribe button for more content, and I will see you next time.
Best player in college football.
That Georgia and Ohio State game, New Year's Eve, is going to be a classic.
Josh Blunder. Hi, everybody. I'm Josh Blunder.
To the